The interview cake for the first year was just me and a laptop. And I was just living off of savings. I had a little bit of money in the bank. And I figured I had something like 6 months of runway before I would like find myself going, I should think about getting another job,
All right, we are recording. Today I have on Parker Finney. He is the creator of Interview Cake. That's at interviewcake.com, and it is a product that helps people train for software engineering interviews at some of the world's top tech companies. If you go on his site, you'll see he has a list of interview questions. You can get on his mailing list for any top company, any language you're trying to prepare for. It's definitely the most amazing interview product that I've seen, but I'm not an expert in this. That's why I wanted to have Parker on. So Parker, thank you for coming on today to talk to me and give people some of your advice.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I like to start with this. It's kind of an easy question, and it is just, what are you working on right now that you're most excited about, and why is that?
Yeah, I'm working on right now and I'm most excited about. There are a few things, some that I can't talk about, unfortunately. What would be cool to talk about? Oh, one thing that's interesting is, one thing we do that's kind of unique. So if you poke around the readings and the practice questions on interviewcake.com, you might notice that all of our stuff is available in 10 different programming languages. Mm-hmm. So it's and the system we have for managing that is pretty unique. So for each of the 10 languages that we support, we have for most of them at least, we have 10. For each language we have 2 contractors who maintain the content in that language. So we have this team of almost 20 folks who are managing our content across these 10 different programming languages. So, and the system that we've built for this, we call C18N. So it's sort of like I18N, which some people may have interacted with, which is I18N stands for internationalization. It's software for letting your website support like a bunch of different spoken languages. So you can have the website in like English and all kinds of other languages. Yeah. So we have kind of an adapted version of that for different programming languages. And that's a project that somebody else on the team has been managing for the past few years. And I just started managing that. So I'm really enjoying sort of learning how that team works and like getting to interact with these contractors we have that are from like all over the world who are working together on this project. And also just seeing like how cool the system is that we've put together internally for managing all that stuff.
And so I may be the only one listening to this that's not exactly sure what that is, but is this actually so that the material on Interview Cake can be syndicated in all these different languages, or is it a similar program that you guys are building internally?
No, so it's what you see on the website right now. Yeah. So if you pull up one of the practice questions, you'll notice like, it describes the question and then it goes through some stuff. And then there'll come a moment when there's like the first code sample where it says like, oh, you could do it this way, or like, oh, here's what an input might look like or something, right? So it's written out as code. And there's, we don't highlight this enough currently. We're working on this, but in the top right corner of the code sample, it'll say what language it's in. And you can click that and it opens up a drop down and you can change it to one of 10 different programming languages. And so then all of the code samples in that practice question or article will then change to that language. But it's actually not just that, because sometimes just changing the code samples is not enough. So for example, because different languages have different requirements and some languages can do things that others can't. One common example is, some languages allow you to edit a string in place and some languages don't. So we have one of our problems that's framed as like the classic, edit this, reverse this string in place problem. And in some languages, we have to actually like reframe the problem so that it's an array of characters in order to kind of get it to work. So it's actually quite detailed what the translation team does in order to make it so that not just the code samples are right, but the whole article is right for each of the 10 different languages. Essentially what they have to do is like rewrite each article in their language.
So is this like almost as if you're building a translation engine for spoken languages? You're kind of doing that to translate everything about the description and then actual code snippet for these questions.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of similarity with how you would go about translating a website into like different spoken languages. So that's why the our internal name for it is based on the name for some common software for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is impressive. That's definitely one of the coolest things I've ever heard someone answer for that question. That's crazy. So anyway, for the people that don't know what Interview Cake is, it should be pretty obvious at this point, but how do you describe it? How do you differentiate the product? Like, how do you see your product in the marketplace? Is it just for everyone prepping for any type of coding interview, or how do you see it?
For sure. Yeah. So Interview Cake is a study tool that allows software engineers to prepare for coding interviews. So if you're not sort of from an engineering background yourself, what I sometimes describe it to people as being kind of like SAT prep, but instead of the SAT, we're preparing you for the coding interview. So it's a study tool. We sometimes call it an online course, but it's at least so far today, it's a product, not a service. So it's a website you can go to that has a bunch of resources and readings and practice problems, and you can do it at your own pace. You don't have a teacher there with you, or office hours or lectures or classmates or anything like that. So that's what we make. In terms of like if there's a specific audience and how we differentiate ourselves, it's something we think about a lot. We're not super focused audience-wise right now. And I think that's been in some ways to our detriment, and in some ways it's been a big strength. I will say that we, I think we're better suited than many other resources in our space for folks that have non-traditional computer science backgrounds. So those folks include like people who came out of computer science, came out of coding boot camps, or people who are just self-taught engineers or stuff like that. Those folks, not always, but will tend to be a little bit weaker on data structures and algorithms. And for better for worse, that's what the coding interview tends to be focused on. So we're really focused on teaching you that stuff in a way that doesn't really assume any prior knowledge, except that you generally know how to code. And in a way that's very approachable and friendly, and not too like textbooky or mathy or academic. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, right? Like this stuff as an engineer, the data structures and algorithm stuff. I think for a lot of us, this feels like the hard part, right? Or this feels like the academic part, or the part that like, I remember when I had to do that in school, and I wasn't that good at it, and I don't super remember how this thing works, and I'd have to look it up, and does this even have anything to do with programming, right? And it's our opinion that a lot of that feeling just comes from the fact that it's really hard to teach well, but it can be taught well in a way where doesn't make you roll your eyes, right? I think this stuff can actually be like approachable and memorable, easy to understand, and even fun. But you have to kind of, throw away the proofs and some of the like jargon and stuff, and just explain stuff in like simple terms,
Yeah, no, the jargon is it's almost unnecessarily unapproachable, and in some cases, I feel like, especially in math for computer science, the jargon is such that it's almost like in order to be technically correct, even in the cases where a certain level of specificity is not required for someone to understand the concept you're trying to teach them, it's applied because of this culture of academia that it seems like in math, it's the worst of any department. And it makes data structures and algorithms, if you try to take it at a university, extremely unapproachable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think what happens a lot is like, you know, I think you need some of the vocabulary and the proofs and stuff for like the you know, like the forefront of the field, right? Like if you want to like prove a new theorem, like, yeah, you got to get real rigorous and you got to be very precise with your language and all that stuff. But if you want to explain something, you don't need any of that, right? Like, it's like comical to me because I think that even the people who are writing the proofs, like, not the way it head is very different from how they're writing it, right? But the way that they're writing it is like sort of the most rigorous way of writing it. It's the most kind of like bulletproof, like, you know, here's how I can prove that this works kind of way of writing it.
Yeah.
But it's probably not how they came up with the idea, you know? So yeah, we focus on just like simple images. We're very diagram heavy wherever we can be. Because our focus is on like getting you to actually understand the thing, right? To like actually have the right picture in your head of like how this data structure works or how this algorithm works.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I feel like it's such an interesting part of computer science too, that it's a shame more people aren't enthusiastic about it. But I'm kind of wondering, so if someone comes out of Interview Cake and they can just crush these, you know, data structures and algorithm sections of these interviews, do you think there's any application for them in their career? Do you think they'll be able to actually gain something they're going to use as an engineer beyond just crushing an interview going through the program?
Yeah, I think definitely something. You know, it's not going to come up every day, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of the truth of it. And it depends kind of like how senior you are, right? Like if you're designing systems, you don't have any sort of like oversight, then you know, it's going to be more important that you know, you're able to very rigorously weigh the pros and cons of like different designs for things, and that you're able to like catch the potential performance issues with code that you're reviewing, that your team's writing, and stuff like that. But at the entry level, like, you know, candidly, I think there might be like some more pressing things for engineers to be working on, such as like, you know, how to use documentation really effectively, or like how to ask very specific questions when you're stuck, right? I think that's something a lot of engineers struggle with, right? There's a big difference between, you know, it doesn't work and I don't know why, and like, hey, you know, on this line, I'm expecting the output to be this, but instead it's this. Can you help me understand why that is? You know. So yeah, I mean that's kind of it's a long answer, but the short answer is yeah, definitely something. But it's not going to be the kind of stuff that comes up every day.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a lot of products, you know, you can make to train people for computer science. There's tons of YouTube channels where people just do tutorials on everything. What made you want to do this product? And then why did you feel like you were the right person to teach this?
Yeah, that's you picked the right question to ask. That's something that I know a lot about. So my background is, you know, I was an engineer and then a product designer. Product manager, really. I guess I wouldn't necessarily call myself a designer, but I got really into product design. I read like the design of everyday things when I was like first moving into product management, and like started really nerding out about, you know, how to design experiences and how to design products. It took kind of starting to play around with the idea of Interview Cake to realize that I'm actually really a big education theory nerd also. I've always been a little bit drawn to teaching and have done like just little bits of it here and there through high school and college. Um, and I would like, to me at least, I would claim that that product design, I would claim that like education is a product design problem. And in fact, like to me, it's kind of the ultimate product design problem, right? Like what you're trying to do with product design is figure out how to make something very comprehensible very quickly to a person, right? And like that's what education is. So yeah, I'm really focused on this stuff. So the particulars of the Interview Cake product came from a bunch of my own like personal philosophies and some testing I did in the early days. So to answer the first question of like, why text and not video? The initial idea, and my views are like evolving a little bit on this stuff, but the initial idea is that video, I tend to struggle with watching lectures and stuff online because you can't control the pacing at all. You can just press play and watch it.
Yeah, totally.
Sometimes you can speed up the video, which I almost always want to do. Right? I find that when I'm watching videos, like I almost always want to be watching it at 2 or 4 times the speed, and I also want to like chop off the first 10 minutes, right? Like think about all the YouTube videos you've seen, like when you're trying to figure out how to do something and you do a YouTube search for like how to start a campfire, and then you pull up the first result and it's like someone's standing in front of the camera and they say, okay, today we're going to talk about how to start a campfire.
You're like, wow.
Now before we get started, like couple notes right off the bat, and then it's like 5 minutes in until they like start actually doing the thing.
The campfire thing, yeah.
Exactly, right? And like this is why I love the Primitive Technology YouTube channel. If you haven't seen it yet, like definitely recommend everyone check it out.
I think I've heard somebody talk about this one.
It's this is a little off topic, but just as a case study in like how to really do video right, he doesn't speak. He just shows you what he's doing.
Yeah,
and
I did.
Cuts it down really nicely. So like, he'll be making tile roofing for a building he's building, and he'll make one of the tiles, and he'll show you that whole process, and then he'll just show a quick shot of like 5 of them, and then he'll just show a quick shot of 100 of them, and then he'll start installing them, right? Whereas, and of course, it took him like several hours, maybe several days to go from 1 to 100. And so many other producers would say like, oh, that took me a lot of time, so it has to take a lot of time in the video. But it doesn't, right? Like we get how one was made, and so we get how 100 are going to be made. Anyway, so I struggle with video for a lot of reasons. I really like how with text, you can skim, right? And you can skim kind of the first time, right? You can look at the headings and kind of know like, oh, I actually know this thing already. I can probably skip that section. You can look at the pictures and sort of figure out what's going on. And then when you want to review something, as much as the pacing of the video may feel too slow and may feel kind of frustrating the first time, it's even worse when you like kind of want to review a topic, but you don't want to sit down through like another 1 hour lecture, right? Like you just kind of want to skim. Right? That was the big thing. Like for me, text is much more skimmable. So I really wanted to do it that way. And then I took that notion even further, and I said like, for those moments when you're like, oh, I think I know this, let me just move on. But then some other people say, oh, wait, I need a little bit more information about that. And I had this vision for these hypertext documents that could unfold and fold according to what you needed. So that's why Interview Cake has this kind of unique choose your own adventure kind of format for the practice questions. where when you say, when you get a problem, you get two buttons. I have an answer or I need a hint. Or sorry, it doesn't say I need a hint anymore. It says, tell me more. And if you click tell me more, a little bit more information unfolds. So it's kind of like, it mimics the dialogue of a real interview. And so it's just kind of, if there was someone sitting there with you trying to kind of nudge you through the problem, it's the next little thing they would say, right? But if you're jumping straight to a problem, to an answer yourself, right? Then we just get out of your way, right? You say, I have an answer, and we just like let you check your answer. Right? There's a little bit more nuance to it than that, but that's the basic idea. So that's why we kind of built it the way that we did, was that I really liked that idea of having a choose your own adventure kind of thing, something that you could skim or read in detail if you needed more details, something that could be short if you already kind of know where this is going, or something that could explain more background info if you needed more background info. And that's also kind of related to your question from before of like, who is Interview Cake best for? We really try our best to run the gamut from like, you know, people coming out of MIT to like people coming out of, you know, programs like Dev Bootcamp or whatever.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that part you were talking about, I had a call come in, by the way. These are wireless, so it just started going to my phone. Horrible. But I heard up to the part where you were talking about the expandable sections, and I don't know how much more you got into that, but it sounds like that would be like the most usable version of a product, because for this specific purpose, talking about the videos, I remember in college, I would never go to lecture. I ended up just sitting in the tutoring rooms because I could get amazing grades spending a few hours there instead of going to any class, because of exactly what you're talking about. As soon as I got stuck, I could get a little hint and go as deep or as shallow as I needed with that problem solving process.
Because the TA would give you little hints, you're saying?
Yes, we had like this type of study hall where they would have, you know, a TA for everyone, so you could get some assistance for PhD students, master students.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, did you just get that idea because of your experience in product design and user interface, or did you have that from another experience, maybe in college or working with other teachers you've worked with?
Yeah, so it actually, I would say the process for coming up with that idea came from my experience with product design. Because what I did was I built an MVP, which was much simpler, and it didn't have any of this nuance. It used what I call a flashcard model. So you had the question, and then you pressed a button, and it would flip over and you would get the answer, or the answer would expand down or whatever. Right? And so then what I did was I was like, okay, time to do some user testing. So I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I made appointments with like half a dozen different friends. I said, let me buy you lunch in exchange for you playing around with this website that I made.
Yeah.
And so I would watch them use the website. And as a bit of background, I had just tutored a close friend who, like, through her coding interview prep process. So I knew what it looked like when I was tutoring someone, and I knew kind of like how I wanted to teach them and what I liked to do when they got stuck and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I knew that like I was trying to make a self-serve resource. So I would sit a friend down and say, use this website, and I would just take notes. And it was very painful because what I saw was some people would get stuck very early on in the problem, and they would, and I wasn't allowed to intervene because, again, like, you know, the idea is to figure out how this would work actually if they were using this alone at home.
Yeah.
And then they would show the answer, right? And so they blew the whole exercise, right? Like all of that. Whereas if I were allowed to intervene, if this was like a tutorial session, I would have just given them a little bit of a nudge and they would have been able to go off and do it, right? I also noticed an interesting kind of like flip side problem, which is that some people would come up with an answer right away, but it would actually be wrong, or it would be the good answer, but not the great answer.
Yeah.
which is a thing about a lot of these problems. They have a good answer, but they also have a great answer. So that was where the idea came from, was that I realized like, okay, some people need those little nudges, right? And some people need kind of the opposite of a nudge, what's I think in education theory sometimes called an interruption. The idea on Interview Cake, we call them gotchas. And it's like just enough if you think you have an answer, it's just enough to tell you, like, oh, hey, there's actually a little bit more to this problem still, right? Without giving you away the whole solution. So that's how I came up with the choose your own adventure kind of unfolding hints and gotchas process. And so I built that out, and then I did some user testing with that. And it was a total sea change. What I saw people doing with the website was very close to what I was actually doing when I was tutoring my friend. So that was when I knew I was kind of onto something.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's almost like you're productizing something that's normally only able to be delivered in a service, which is pretty exciting. Business wise, I mean, it just seems like you have a product that's worth far more than you're charging, which is always great. And so I guess we can kind of use that to lead into what made you want to do this, like become an entrepreneur. Was it just that you had this idea that you thought was so solid, or did you always kind of want to start something and you just saw that this was the thing that was worth doing?
Yeah, it was both. It was both of those things. I had wanted to do something since college, but didn't really have an idea. So I worked at a startup for a little over a year, and then it became clear that it was time for me to move on from there. So I was looking for the next thing. And I really wanted to do my own thing, but I still wasn't sure. I didn't have an idea. I kind of had some vague ideas around, like, I wanted to make like a Python web scraping company that would like make tools to help people scrape stuff off the internet or something. But then unrelatedly, my good friend Alice ended up needing a lot of help with her, maybe not a lot of help. She ended up needing help with her job search. And so I helped her prep for interviews. And that experience was what made me go like, oh, wow, yeah, there's, because what I to do was just something to Alice, be like, oh yeah, you just got to read this book. Oh, you just got to like do 20 problems on this website, whatever. And I realized that, at least in my opinion, like I couldn't recommend any of those resources. I knew that all of them would take her much longer to get to where she needed to be than just sitting down with me. And so once I saw that, like, you know, I had some kind of unique ideas for like how to stuff, I started thinking like, okay, would other people want to use this?
Yeah, no, totally. That's awesome. That's definitely sounds like a cool way to have an idea for this. So yeah, I was actually surprised at how long you've been doing this. You guys have really been working this product for a long time. How did you know kind of when to expand your team and who you needed, and how's that happening? Because 20 people seems like it's a lot.
Yeah. So the 20 people are Upwork contractors. So they're part-time. And depending on where we are on translation stuff, there may be weeks where big parts of the team don't have any work from us. So, and we're a pretty lean team. We're 3 people in the office currently. And actually, I think that number is going to shrink down in the near future. And that I think we're going to move to an all remote kind of setup. So some changes are coming up for us on the staffing stuff. But yeah, I can talk about the early days. So the Interview Cake for the first year was just me and a laptop, and I was just living off of savings. I had a little bit of money in the bank, and I figured I had something like 6 months of runway before I would like find myself going, I should think about getting another job. I wasn't going to fall off a cliff after 6 months.
Yeah.
So I just went to work building the product. And in fact, like I got a desk at a co-working space even before I left my previous job. So I had my last day at my old job and then my first day at my new job, like right away.
Yeah.
And that the ritual of like having a place to go to work every day and just like, trying to get in at a reasonable hour and then sometimes leave at a reasonable hour, right? Just kind of helped me to make it feel like I had a job, even though I didn't. It just kind of gave me a little bit of structure, which again, for me was really necessary. I even remember in the early days, I would do things like I would put down like, I would put on a nice button down shirt. Again, just to kind of make it feel like I was doing something, right? To kind of like feel like I had, like it mattered or because for me, the risk is otherwise, if I try to work from home, I just end up kind of like cleaning my apartment and then like making some lunch and then like, like maybe going for a run and then, and then like before I know it, the day's over. Right. So having forcing back in some of the ritual of like a real job was really helpful for me. So it took about until I had the confidence to start actually charging people. And it started off at $5. And I remember the copy I wrote for the sales page said like, I felt very like apologetic for asking for $5 from people. And I had this copy that said like, for the price of a burrito, you can blah, blah, blah. And I felt like I had to justify like, no, it's not that much money. It's only a burrito. And, since then our prices have gone up quite a bit, but yeah, it took me a while to start having the confidence to start charging people. And I wish that I had started charging earlier and like building up confidence around that. Because you learn, you get much better feedback on your product when people are paying for it, right? People, if someone's given you $100 and they're not happy, they're going to let you know.
Yeah. No, totally. I'm sure people are pretty, anything people buy online, they're super particular about. So, this is presumably for people that are trying to get at some competitive tech company. What do you think it is about software engineering that's, so desirable for people? Like, would you recommend it to many people as a career path, having done it yourself? Like, what do you think it is about it that's draws so many people in, especially now? It seems like it's so popular on YouTube in particular. So many CS channels coming up.
Yeah. What is it about programming? I mean, I think at some point it becomes a little self-fulfilling, right? It's just that scene in The Graduate where like I forget it is like one of the dad's friends or like an uncle or something says to the guy like, hey, here's a tip: plastics, go into plastics.
Oh yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that. Like I think it's at some point there just is a hip thing and then everyone wants to get into the hip thing. It's just like it feels like it's hot, right? And I think there are a lot of things that make tech feel hot right now, including the fact that like some of the biggest companies in the world are tech companies. So I think that's true. I think that it's it's just like hit a critical mass and now like everyone's just like it's the gold rush kind of thing. I think even before that there have been a few interesting things around like tech education. I think has gotten better. Like it's a lot easier to learn how to start making cool stuff with code than when I first started, for example, and I'm sure that was even much easier than like 15 years prior or whatever. Partly because the tooling is kind of a little more friendly, a little more high level. It's easier to like sling some web stuff with Ruby than it was. Well, I was going to say than it was with PHP, but I'm not sure if that's true. And actually, now that I say that, it might be true that like as a starting point, PHP was like more friendly than Ruby because the time I was using PHP, people, or at least people like me, were not using like frameworks.
Yeah.
And so it was just like single documents. So like the mental model was just like a little clearer for like how to code up stuff on the internet. But anyway, regardless, I remember like the first time I started trying to learn how to program, I was like trying to write a game in like C++.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just it just takes so much more code to get into something interesting, right? And I think that's a thing that's really exciting about like where programming is continuing to move right now, is that you can do more with less code, which means not just that like, you know, it's more efficient and like you can build products faster and all that stuff, but also that it's like kind of more fun for more people, more approachable for more people. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, no, I think totally the bar to actually build something that's interesting is so much lower.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, man, talk about a lot about interview cake. If somebody's getting ready and they want to be like a software engineer, what other resources would you recommend for them? Like, what do you see out there? I know you mentioned coding bootcamp a little bit. What do you see out there? I mean, obviously that's like for, you know, before your interview at Facebook or whatever, but before that point, like, what do you recommend for people trying to get into software engineering?
Yeah, so you're thinking like folks who are just totally don't have any programming experience at all, and just
or like maybe just a little bit, and they're like still on the fence about really getting serious about it to try to get a job or something.
Yeah, it's a cool time. There's a whole landscape of like products that help you learn how to code, and there are different models and different price points, and you can kind of pick your favorite, or you can kind of start on the bottom, and then as you get increasingly into it, kind of invest more time and money. So on one end, you have free and self-served, self-paced kind of stuff like Codecademy. I haven't looked at them recently. It's possible they're moving towards some paid stuff, but there's also stuff like Code School, which I think basically doesn't exist anymore. They were bought by Pluralsight a while ago, and they continued to have a separate brand, but I think they're when Pluralsight did its IPO recently, they phased out the Code School brand. So I guess, man, these recommendations are not turning out very well.
That's okay.
Well, so there's also treehouse.com as far as I remember. A great example, and there it's just like a flat monthly fee, and they just have a bunch of online courses that will take you from the very beginning through to like making the websites and through to like various specific skills if you want to move into other stuff from there. So there's that kind of stuff, and it's pretty affordable. It's not much more than like Netflix or whatever, right? And then if you want to kind of get a little bit more serious, or you find that you need a little more structure, you can get into stuff like Thinkful or Block.io, I believe, has a similar model. I'm sure there are others where it's somewhat servicey, or maybe more fully servicey, but nonetheless still remote.
Yeah.
So you'll have like a TA and or a teacher, maybe like lecture hours, maybe office hours, but you're also kind of spending the majority of your time working on problem sets and projects and stuff like that. That's my understanding of how those programs work. So there's that kind of stuff. And then there's the coding boot camps where you show up to the space every day. And then some of those coding boot camps also have like a remote option. So there's really kind of a menu of like different ways to do it. And I think a lot of folks are kind of sampling a couple things, right? You start off with something like Code School or Treehouse to, which again are just kind of self-paced online video and practice problem-based courses that are very affordable. You start there, kind of see if it continues to stick, and then if you want to get a little bit more serious, you move into one of the more structured, more expensive programs.
Yeah, I know they have some like really expensive ones, all the way from free code camp to like $20,000 boot camps. So yeah, definitely a huge range. I just have a couple more questions. Second to last one, what's the plan? Is there anything you can talk about with your plans for Interview Cake? Do you plan to make it a recurring product, like recurring payment products, monthly basis or yearly basis? Do you plan to release other products? Anything like that you can talk about?
Yeah, we have a few things in the works that are pretty interesting. And some of them, like, we're kind of feeling out. We'll see where it goes. One, I'm trying to decide if I want to talk about this one. I think I won't, unfortunately. But well, one of the biggest things we're doing right now is just kind of rounding out our set of resources. So we added something recently. If you go to interviewcake.com/DSR, we have a data structures reference. So for each of the core data structures, the idea is, if you want to look up what a hash map is, right? Or like you want a quick reference of, maybe you kind of know what it is, but like you want to double check, like, how do hash collisions work, or what's the time cost of this operation, if you Google that, often you'll end up on Wikipedia, which is okay, but again, Wikipedia has that very academic kind of voice that we talked about before. You're going to get something that's going to be kind of 2 times as detailed and 4 times as sort of academic and jargon heavy as you need, probably, for what you're looking it up for. So we're trying to build like a more friendly data structures and algorithms reference. That's one of the big things. We're thinking about some ideas around maybe making Interview Cake a little bit more service-y. And that's in the very early stages, but I have kind of some ideas around like, we could go all the way to like opening up a space and having like, a 3-week program. Maybe it's like evenings only, maybe it's like full-time during the day. There are some other programs like that do really well. I'm not sure that I really want to get into that business. But then there's the in-between thing, which is, can you be like sort of setting the pace and having office hours and maybe lectures and stuff while still being fully remote and not as high touch as an in-person program like that. So that's kind of something I'm playing around with that I think could be really interesting, is like, is there a version of Interview Cake where you join at a certain time and you have a cohort of 20 other people who have similar backgrounds to you. So maybe they're all coding bootcamp grads, if that's kind of where you're coming from. And you're all in a shared Slack channel or on a shared mailing list. And there's office hours every week where you can bring like problems you're struggling with and stuff. And maybe there's a pacing to the course so that like you're all doing the same types of problems or learning the same types of algorithms at the same time. That's something, again, it's still kind of in the idea phase, but something I'm excited to think about maybe experimenting with.
No, that'd be super cool. I know there's a lot of programs, especially in tech, like post after college grad education programs like that really, or before college. I know there's a lot of people just going straight into it, but that really are super high quality, like that hybrid, I guess, the product service model. Yep. So my last question is just, is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have, that you'd like to talk about or you'd recommend for people? Anything?
I guess, I don't know, this is just something I like to talk about a little bit. Is like, the thing you brought up earlier about the design of Interview Cake.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested in this idea of like documents that can adapt to the needs of the reader.
Mm-hmm.
I think people aren't like talking about this enough, but I think there's a lot you can do. I mean, if you think about like the word hypertext, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is like what the H in HTML stands for, it's like text, but you can like program on top of it.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful, right? And so that allows you to do some kind of simple stuff, like, you can have anchor tags, right? You can have links that like point you to different parts of the document. But also, instead of jumping someone, like for footnotes, for example, right? You can have like a little one, and then you click on it and it brings you down to the footnote thing. But that's an artifact of like how books work, right? In my opinion, what you really ought to do is like, if you want to give more context on that thing, let people click on the thing and then have a drawer that opens up right there that gives you that additional context. So that's something we do on Interview Cake, right? And if they don't need that drawer, they can just close it. Maybe it starts off expanded and they can close it or not, right? And that idea of like, taking a document and breaking it up into sections and letting the user kind of unfold it as they go. But, if there's a whole part that they already know about, they can fold that part up and like continue moving on to the other stuff. I'm also really interested in kind of another angle on this is stuff like annotations. A company called Genius, which used to be called Rap Genius, is, as I understand, playing around with this kind of stuff a little bit. Some people have talked about this in the space of like journalism, right? Like, what if, as you're reading a piece of news, there could be like crowdsourced annotations all over the place where someone could say like, hey, this is actually like a misleading fact, or, stuff like that. I just think there's a lot that can be done with hypertext, right? We still think about web pages really similarly to how we think about books. And I think there's a lot of promise that we're missing out on. So yeah, that's something I like to talk about and like to think about.
No, that's super interesting because, with interactive web, it's so easy to want to add like visualizations and throw up a bunch of videos, but I think it takes a lot more thoughtfulness to create that type of intuitive content for interaction where you can really get out of it what you need in that time. Yeah, it is kind of surprising when you mention it that way, that more people haven't focused all of the interactive web technology we have on making things usable like that. It kind of reminds me actually of what you were saying about that, it's a very popular design book, The Design of Everyday Things, how so many everyday physical products we have are designed so poorly. And it seems like that is very similar with the interactive web. Because the amount of things that are interactive on most websites that don't make the experience more useful, it's pretty astounding when you think about it. There's a lot. That's interesting. You've never thought about doing any products or anything for content creators on how to, productize content like that more or something like that?
Yeah, definitely have. And the truth is, like, a big part of me, would love to focus on that kind of problem a lot more. Another big part of me would love to like step away from tech entirely and like go to music school or something. But I sort of candidly, like, for Interview Cake right now, the bottlenecks on the business mostly I think are not on the product, right? I think that people like the product well enough. So the things that the business needs are more around marketing and other kind of like growth stuff. But I miss those very early days when I was just really focused on, you know, how can I make this lesson like even quicker to digest, and how can I make this practice problem like really mimic the way it would work if I was sitting down there with the person with a notebook, like actually teaching them the thing. So yeah, I'm really interested in that stuff, and I wish I could kind of spend more time on it.
Yeah. It seems like it could be pretty lucrative because content marketing is such a big business, and people's ability to like get numbed out to content. People are always trying to think of innovative ways. I had a boss actually that when we would write articles, she would obsess about, she called productizing the content so that we didn't have an interactive web like that, but in the text, someone could skim it and go in and out in the sections to get exactly what they wanted. And she would obsess about it. And it seems like that's just the next level what you described. So that's awesome. That's awesome. But anyway, it's been a super long time. I'm sure you have things to do. I'm going to cut the interview and we can chat, but I really want to thank you for coming on, Parker. Thank you for sharing all of your information with everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian.